Thank you guys for tuning in to Tag Church here in Little Rock, Arkansas. We pray that this message will truly be a blessing for you today. If you would like to partner with us financially, you can do so by visiting us at tagchurch.net. And also, if you have any prayer requests, please don't hesitate to send it to the email address on your screen because we would love to partner with you in prayer. So, I hope you're ready for a word from the Lord today. Let's get right into it, and God bless you.
Let's get back. I want to deal with that this morning. Right now, the subject of let's get back. Three things during this season that we must understand before I read this text as individuals and as a church that we must reclaim. I'm going to have 3 points to this message today, and they're all as important as the other. Number one, we must get back the things that were stolen by the adversary. Church, family, individually. Anytime anything like this happens, when the enemy can look for a crack in the door, he takes advantage of it and he begins to move in to try to use it in a horrible way. So number one, we've got to get back what the enemy has stolen from many of you, financially and all, during this time. In 1 Samuel that we're going to deal with, I want to get to this, the story of 1 Samuel chapter 30, where David and his men, remember the story, had been out fighting, protecting territory of neighboring nations. Go down with it a little bit more, guys, when I get into it, down a tiny bit. David and his men, remember this, I want to share this point, had been out fighting and protecting territory of neighboring nations. And they returned very tired and very weary, only to find everything they held precious was destroyed. So we pick up this narrative, this story in chapter 30 of 1 Samuel. I'm going to read a certain translation that brought it alive even more than the King James of verse 1. 1 Samuel 30 verse 1. And on the third day, David and his men reached Ziklag. Now the Amalekites had raided and burned Ziklag and had taken captive the women and everyone else in it, both young and old. It stresses here, they killed none of them. So we know why they took them. They killed none of the women. They killed none of the children. Slavery is involved. They killed none of them, but they carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's 2 wives had been captured. And David was the man after God's own heart, was greatly distressed because the men talked of, watch this, not necessarily just because of losing what he had. Come on, Corona, losing what he had. But he was greatly distressed because of the men that had fought with him, talked of stoning him. Because each one, because of the circumstances, each one was bitter in his spirit because of their losses. Each one of the men that had been out in victory, winning great battles, was now bitter because of what happened in their spirits because of their losses. Lay your Bible beside you. Imagine David and his men had been in a season of intense warfare like this was thrown on us about 10 weeks ago. Them, like us, were very tired. They were very weary. They were very exhausted. And they reached their city, only to find when they reached their city, homes that were burned, a city that was absolutely destroyed, and all of their wives and children and all their possessions economically was taken captive by the enemy. They had been so ravished by the enemy that here's the deal I want you to see. They considered taking David's life first and then committing suicide. And I want to bring to your attention today something when we hear this story that we never think about. Nuggets I want to give you. The truth is, David's men weren't mighty until they encountered him. The one that they wanted to stone and the ones that they wanted to literally kill with a rock. They never had what they had until they met him. The Bible says that there were several hundred men that David took in that were broken down men who were in debt, who were distressed and discontented. And what did David do when he met them and took them in? And he didn't have to. There was nothing in it for him. He gave them a purpose for crawling out of their caves. He taught them how to emotionally recover. He trained them. He fought for them. He loved them. And he simply carved purpose out of their pain. It was under his leadership that they became prosperous. The biblical type, the way God sees it, they became very prosperous. I thought about it, not to bring up the past because we're going to get back today and we're going forward. But I thought about something 6.5 years ago when a call came to me, and I always want you to be in remembrance, to stir your pure minds of remembrance. Brother Gunner, you understand, and the rest of you here, Brother Jumper, that when Dwayne Maynard called me and said, this church wants me to come and this one here wants me to come, but there's one in Little Rock, Arkansas that was down to about 30, 40, 50 people. Seriously. There were 3 kids, I think, left in the youth group. 3 kids. And not to knock this at all, because we are a lover of the elderly. You white-headed people, you won't find a preacher that loves you any more than he and I. I want you to hear me. We appreciate you as much as any young, any teenager, any 20s and 30s. But this church just 6.5 years ago had 30 to 40 elderly people. All of them had white hair. They had already grayed. They wasn't graying. They had maxed out on their gray. Do you understand what I'm saying? There was no youth. There was nothing happening. There was nothing exploding. It wasn't near an explosion. Nothing was lit. But it was solid people that needed something. And I never want you to forget this, like David, the relationship with his men. And God's raised up a little mountain home Arkansas boy named Dwayne and Crystal Maynard. Led him and uprooted him from a place in Missouri and brought him to Little Rock, Arkansas. And in 6.5 years, you know what has happened? Dwayne Maynard and Crystal Maynard's ministry gave you a purpose for crawling out of your cave. They taught you how to emotionally recover. They have trained you, fought for you, loved you, and they have carved purpose out of your pain. They have given vision where everything was snatched out. They have given dreams to reach for. And today, even in the midst of a coronavirus, they know how to get back. David wept with these men until they couldn't weep anymore. So often followers, the reason I said all that, just 6.5 years ago, so often followers demand compassion from the leader, but often miss the opportunity to return the compassion. It's called taking someone for granted. I've sat in 37 years of revivals with pastors in restaurants, countless pastors who have wept openly for their people. I've literally, like David, sitting across from me, watched the tears drip down their cheeks into their food, tears splashing in their food. But seldom do I ever sit with men and women who weep over their pastor. Had it not been for David's training and generosity, there would have been nothing to steal. I want you to hear that again. If there had not been for David's training and his generosity to these men and family, there would have been nothing for the Amalekites to steal. I want to parallel that to the ministry of Dwayne Maynard and Crystal Maynard at Tag Church. You feel attacked lately? Listen, if it had not been for them 6.5 years, no doubt in my mind, coming here and someone else, and I never want any of you to forget this. Never forget it. Stir it up constantly. Amen? You'll never go past the appreciation of your pastor. You'll never go past the appreciation of your pastor. What this man and woman has drilled in you, again, what they have given you, that's the reason you've been under an attack. I want you to hear what I'm about to say. My little granddaughter, Evie, my little biracial granddaughter, Evie Madu, Robert Madu, great young evangelist, 35, is her father, married my daughter. My granddaughter and I were out in the garden playing around in the yard, and we found this rock. We had a paint set at home. So I let her get out the paint set because she's really a great artist. When you see a gift in a child, immediately I told my daughter, I said, Taylor, my God, look at her artistry. When she takes a little book or something, she's a tiny girl, she never, ever goes outside the lines. She chooses the right colors. With a white mother and a black father, a biracial child, it's amazing to go up, not saying to her, and see her as she paints or colors in the faces of different people. I notice she never paints their faces all white. And she never paints them, it's beautiful, all black. Some of you Hispanic people would love her too. She meets it in the middle with a brown. I see her paint white faces without going outside the line. Then she'll paint another little girl as black without anybody saying, she's this big, without anybody saying anything. And then she'll paint a light brown. And then she'll paint this, and she'll give it this color and give it that color. Well, she picked up a rock, a stone like this, and she began to paint on it. And she wrote on it, share, and she wrote love. And she painted her G, a picture. And as she put the yellow and the red hearts of love, and the yellow smiley face on it, and she brought it over to me. Now, it was my rock, my paints, and my granddaughter. And I thought about when I held the rock and I read this story. You know, it's one thing if people you don't know throw rocks at you. But what about those you love and invest everything in, David? And you're giving them everything you got and they turn on you. It was here at Ziklag during this revolt that David fell beneath the crushing blows of rejection, isolation, and defeat. But here's what it did for David. Pastor, it forced him to stop looking around, and David, a turning point hit when he started literally looking up. Extreme depression broke open David's heart, and it birthed out a king. In everything we see, the transition of David from an adulterer, etc., the Bathsheba scenario, the murdering of Uriah, her faithful, loyal husband to him, and everything that we often hear both sides, man after God's own heart, adulterer, man after God's own heart, murderer, man after God's own heart, kind of woman problems here, David, man after God's own heart. You know when nobody ever talks about when the change happened. When was it that something happened? When did the desperation break open his heart and a literal leader and a great king came out? Listen, nothing pleases God more than ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Faith is the opportunity to stare down our fears and bet against our circumstances. When David's men reached for an excuse, David recognized opportunity. The difference between being shattered and broken is the willingness of the wounded to receive the healing. So there are two types of people that carry bags of stones. Two types of people that even go to church that carry bags of stones. Have I observed them in 37 years of evangelism, 40 of salvation? There is giant slayers, and there is number two, mercy killers. Giant slayers, number one, the Davids of this world. The only reason he grabbed 5 smooth stones is he heard a big demon-possessed ugly giant had 4 brothers. He was ready to be a giant slayer. His objective for the stones in the bag hanging off his belt was to slay giants. Number two, mercy killers. Pharisees, their objective when they had the stones in their hand was to destroy this woman tossed at the feet of Jesus. They are known as mercy killers. You see, the thing is, I've observed about all of us, on point one, we all carry stones. Every one of us carry stones. We just use them differently. To slay giants or to be a mercy killer. And where you are spiritually, I've observed it in everybody, where you are spiritually always decides what you destroy. One of our parts said, but David in this horrific turn of events found strength in the Lord, his God. And then David said to the priest, bring me the ephod. And the priest brought to him the ephod, and David immediately inquired of the Lord. When the stones were raised against him by those that he trained and those that he loved and those that he had given everything to, David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this raiding party? Question. And again, will I overtake them? Please look at those two questions. Shall I pursue, Lord, and will I overtake them? Every battle, every crisis has a turning point. In every battle and crisis, whether it's a virus, whether it's financially, whether it's everything that comes in this package, there's a point where it runs you to God or it runs you literally away from God. Please listen to that. This was the apex of David's crisis, standing in the smoldering ashes of the village, not being able to find his wives, not being able to find his kids, with his own men discussing his fate. David makes a daring petition, a two-part question, a yes or no answer. Number one, God, I need to talk to you. Shall I pursue? God, do you want me to arise from this place of defeat and pursue what has been unlawfully taken? Or number two, shall I overtake it? Notice the intentional use of the personal pronoun in both questions. It is in seasons of great loss. In what we are going through right now, yes, it's great loss. To see our president, I've got to give her honor due. I'm a statistics man. I'm not a personality man. I'm a statistic man when it comes to a leader. To see what President Trump has done with our economy, trust me, I say it politely. If you don't understand, you're really ignorant of it. I love you, but you're ignorant of it. Forget the Democrat-Republican deal. If he's Democrat, I'd say the same thing. The statistics, like an athlete when he is viewed by a college scout or a professional scout, and they're going to sink a lot in them. They want to see the stats. They don't want to talk to his mama and see how nice she is. They want the stats of the athlete. When I looked at anybody bragging on them, arguing, everybody contradicting everything all the time, hell rises up in confusion. I look at the stats. I'm 59 years old. I've never seen any statistics on the economy for black people, white people, men, women, Hispanic. I'm just shooting it out. I've studied the statistics. There has never been a president of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, Kennedy's, any of them, that have done what this man has done. I've never seen anybody fought like him. I've never seen a Democrat, a Republican, a preacher, a military guy, a police officer, a detective. I've never seen a mayor, anybody fought like this man. His wife can't even, listen, they can't even, for Christmas, decorate the White House because all the ultimate liberals said, it looks like a whorehouse to me. They can't decorate. They can't walk. They can't say a word without being under attack. You better hear me. And yet, whether you like him or not, in the midst of this, when I look at the statistics, there has never been anyone match in 3 years. It was in 2 years. What he has done for this economy in making the choices under extreme attack he's made. From the unemployment rate, and what I hate about this as much as anything, of everything we have all done to make it great. We have watched it collapse in 10 weeks. Not his fault at all. And if there's anybody who can build it back, I'll say it about him. He can build it back. In seasons of great loss, we don't need a rhema word for everyone. We need instructions for ourselves. Will my family recover? Will my daughter be healed? What about my grandmother got corona, Robbie? Will my finances ever recover? With his face covered in ashes, David bows his head in surrender, and the word of the Lord roars back at him. David, what he's saying to Tag Church and getting back, David, pursue them. God's answer to the 2-point question, David, listen to the word of the Lord, pursue them. He made it personal. David, pursue them. For number 2, you will certainly overtake them. You will succeed in this rescue. Following God's leading, David takes off with 400 warriors following the charge. 400, though tired, though battle-weary, though literally broke, consumed with grief, and they made the choice to pursue and recover. You know what the word said? You listen to me. For 3 days and 3 nights, David and his men pursued. I quote the King James. On the 4th day, David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them got away except for 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. And listen to the word. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they had taken. David brought back everything. He took all the flocks. He took all the herds. He took his men and drove them ahead of the other livestock, chanting. And the men that almost stoned him to death were now chanting, "This is David's spoil. This is David's spoil. This is David's spoil." Tag church, get back. Let's get back to what God has. Woo! This ain't stopping nothing. Are you kidding me? How weak would we be to let everything when we get back and we have nothing where we were? In 10 weeks, if we can lose it in 10 weeks, we didn't ever have anything in the first place. Let me ask the families here, we're going to have a pity party come to this or a plunder story once your crisis ends? I believe there's some men and women of faith who today are going to make a choice that will change the outcome of our current crisis. There's a decision that's going to separate those who collapse during the heat of the battle from those who rise up, pursue, and conquer the enemy that has sought to destroy your life and your relatives. Brother Dwayne, everywhere I've ever been, there's a remnant of those who will recognize a God instruction, who desire a tomorrow that is different than their today. Faith can be used a number of ways. Some will use in this crisis our faith to survive a crisis, and some will use their faith to abolish their crisis. Will you be one of those who will not be satisfied with anything less than total and absolute victory? It takes as much faith to believe God to survive a crisis as it does to have faith to overcome a crisis. Number 1, individuals, family, business owners. You business owners, you know what I'm saying. You got the responsibility. The buck stops with you. You can lose a lot in 10 weeks if you don't watch it. You can lose a lot. But we got to, number 1, regain what the enemy has stolen. Whether it's 10 weeks, 10 months, or 10 years. Number 2, tag. You must regain any lost momentum. We've got to regain, because I'm a part of you, I'm your evangelist, and will be till I die. I often have people, CEOs of businesses and pastors ask me, if I look beyond the numbers on the spreadsheet, Robbie, or the number of seats filled on, or they're empty on Sunday, how do I know if we're gaining or losing momentum? If we were to research the definition of momentum, it's an interesting word, always pops up. Anytime you study the word momentum, directly associated with the word momentum is the word resistance. Resistance. By definition, here's what it is. If we're going to regain it, we got to know what it is. Momentum is a measure of how difficult it is to stop something. Momentum, from a different angle today, is a measure of how difficult it is to stop something. Let me personalize this. On the phone March this year with Dwayne Maynard. When it hit, it wasn't looking good. One of the first things he said to me, God, I don't want to lose our momentum. As a pastor, leader, shepherd of this flock, he literally was starting to feel, he's human, starting to feel kind of weird, feeling kind of down a little bit. I sensed it in his voice, though he's very positive, about the momentum that possibly could be lost from going to the videos and not being here. There's nothing like this. Stop all that video stuff. Are you kidding me? There's nothing like us being here today. Let's not beat around the bush on this. There's nothing like it. But let me personalize this just a minute. Robbie, will we lose our momentum? He asked me. How do you know? I said, Dwayne, if you're accelerating. How do you know, literally, from a car to anything else, how do you know if you're accelerating? And let me ask you number two, how much resistance are you feeling? Why'd you ask those two questions together? Because there is no resistance if you're not moving. There is no resistance if you're standing still and you're not getting anywhere. You will always feel, resistance when you are accelerating, when your family accelerates, when you personally in the Spirit accelerate. Hell won't fight you as long as you're standing still, lazy, slothful, doing nothing. You know when the hell fights every church I've ever seen? You know why it is those that are fiery, cutting-edge churches tell me we're fighting hell like never before. Personal attacks, family attacks, corporate attacks, somebody wanting to sue us and we don't know where it came from. You know why those type of churches are fought? Because they've got great acceleration and the resistance is starting to feel. Resistance, here it is the pressure you feel from whatever it is you are surpassing. Resistance is the pressure you feel from whatever it is that you are surpassing. So remember this, Tag Church. Don't be shocked. I would not have you ignorant, brethren. If there's no friction, there's no acceleration. If there's no friction, there's no acceleration. I've always, in technology, it's still, I can't fully figure it out, and the only answer is what I can give you right now. When I sat on a plane in 1983, 22 years old, my first flight, an American Airlines huge plane with several hundred on it. I got on the plane at 22 years old. I looked around, Caleb, at all the people. I knew the wings outside were full of fuel. I thought about all the luggage when I looked out the window they were putting inside. I thought, God, I know technology is amazing, but I can't figure out how this can take off. How can this thing even lift off the ground an inch, much less fly around the world? How can this plane go? And the thing that I had to understand, planes don't take off just because of the speed. Planes could get up to 100 and something, close to 200 miles an hour, whatever it is, and they began to lift. But if there was no such thing as resistance, if there was no such thing as friction on those wings, if there was no such thing as some resistance to get those wings, they could go up to 500 miles an hour and they would just be flat on the runway going 500. But that plane, no matter the weight or whatever, the reason they're picky about the weight, how many's on it, and sometimes how much those small planes, each person weighs. You know why? The pilot knows he's got to get up to a certain speed of momentum for that friction to come against him. In other words, he welcomes the friction, because the friction, not the speed, the friction is what lifts that plane so it can elevate itself and you can get where you're going. We've got to understand that friction is often evidence of our impending progression and prosperity. This happened with the first century church. When the church began to grow, they immediately encountered global resistance. You know what their global resistance was? Not coronavirus. It was persecution. In Acts chapter 7 concludes that the stoning concludes with the stoning of Stephen. It opens up in chapter 8. Paul is consenting the death of Stephen. At that time, there was great resistance against the church at Jerusalem. They were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. The New Testament church began to take from the following day of Pentecost, form from the following day of Pentecost, where thousands, sometimes 2,000 to 3,000 a day was being added to the church. Massive expansion hit. Every sect of the city, from the wealthy to the impoverished, they were being added to the Pentecostal church daily. It was during this massive season of growth that resistance, persecution arose. It was persecution, resistance, friction that forced the disciples away from Jerusalem. They left the nucleus. They left the hub. the nest of their comfort, and they reached the four corners of the earth. They were forced, because of resistance, to evolve from a local gathering to a global outreach. You see, it's because of persecution that you and I in the United States 2,000 years later have the gospel. It's because of friction. It ain't because of tongues. It's not because of anything. That plane on the streets of Jerusalem was taken off, and it didn't even realize, no matter how it sped up. The early church had to have friction to fly over those waters and to get the gospel to us today. You're here not because of Shalamakandalabakata. You're here not because the lame man walked in Acts 3. You're not here because Lazarus raised from the dead. You're here because of friction. You're here with your mask on because of resistance. You're here because a spiritual plane took off and crossed the waters and found us. Persecution is a way of making us evolve, catapulting you into areas we've never considered. I remember when the housing market, some of you are too young, crashed in the 90s. Suddenly money marketers, real estate moguls, being forced outside their comfort zone into areas of expertise they never had considered. Sometimes crisis, come on Corona, crisis forces you to take a new dimension of thinking. In the mid-1800s, if you don't get anything else, I bet some of you never heard this. It's powerful. In the mid-1800s, Chicago, Illinois grew into a major lake port and an industrial center because the city of Chicago in the 1800s was built on a lake marshland, and the city of Chicago literally began to sink beneath the mud. The massive amounts of mud made infrastructure unstable. Watch this. And a breeding ground for cholera. Cholera, which was as bad, maybe worse than the coronavirus. From the city of Chicago, the horrible disease of cholera, because of where the city was planted, began to spread, killing more than 5% of the population of Chicago. That's 1 in 20 died. Not had trouble breathing and sniffle nose and fever 3 days. They died. As comparison, Montreal, Canada, has a combined urban and metro population of 7.5 million. Okay, you ready? I'm paralleling. 5% of that population dying would equal 375,000 deaths in Montreal right now by itself. Chicago was losing life daily. The city of Chicago had to create a more stable infrastructure. And in a mass effort, don't miss this, they tried. They graded its streets so water would run off into the Chicago River. But when that attempt happened, it failed. They tried planking, literal building boards, calling in guys that build homes to plank over the streets of Chicago, Illinois, only to discover the planks began to warp and rot from the moisture beneath the infrastructure. The city board hired engineers whose ideas repeatedly failed. And since the city was only 3 feet above Lake Michigan, underground sewers would not drain properly. You talking about a problem. After consulting with numerous engineers, they finally had an innovative thinker, don't miss this, who sat with them and made a suggestion. Here it is, tag. Stop trying to dig beneath the city. But he said, let's instead elevate the entire city of Chicago. Methodically, let's raise Chicago out of the ruins. See, sometimes it's not enough to drain away what is infecting your city, your business, or your church. Sometimes you got to learn when a crisis hits, you got to build above it. It took 20 years, 2 decades, to raise Chicago's buildings to 4 to 14 feet higher than the foundations beneath them. The storm sewers had to be placed on top of the streets. It took men turning thousands of large jack screws at the same time to keep the buildings of Chicago from collapsing. Many smaller structures, especially houses, were moved to new locations. They moved people's homes. The raising and lifting 4 to 14 feet of Chicago became the talk of the nation. But for the people of Chicago, the enormous undertaking not only solved a problem, it testified to the young city's character. Nothing better illustrates the energy and determination of people than to place them in impossible situations where they are called upon to work together to keep what they have constructed from collapsing. 6.5 years it's been. You have built, though it's not numerically where we want it, you have built in the spirit world what God sees. An oasis to come to. My God, if you're thirsty in the greater Little Rock area, you know where I tell them all to go? Tag. If they're black and they call me, go to Tag. If they're white and they call me, go to Tag. I was on Terry Wilson, his family, I don't know how long, go to Tag. I was with David and his Stokes family meeting and talking in a bathroom back here during revival. I said, David, you got to get a part of this church. You got to get to Tag. God is rebuilding your family. God is taking the years that the cankerworm and the caterpillar and the palmer worm and the locust hath eaten. You know what your church, you know what your family needs? Your family needs Tag. Not just Jesus. You need Tag. Let's get back. Whew. Whew. Raising a city, a church, a business out of a horrible situation. Your family requires ingenuity and persistence. Bringing on a team whose ability to see things different, who know how to sustain the infrastructure, keep things from collapsing. The early Babylonians made a decision to work together. You know the story. They took stone and slime and constructed bricks. They made an executive decision. Number one, what did the Babylonians say? Let's build a city and a tower. Let's build it tall enough to reach into heaven so we can make a name for ourselves, so that we will not be scattered. Matter of fact, we can be as elevated as God is. And that next scripture is sobering to me. It says, and God came down. A sovereign God who sees everything. A sovereign God who sees every time a bird hits the ground. He'll tell you it's a sparrow. Hair on and off your head. Come on, man. And God saw something happening, Curtis. And God came down to see the city and tower. When is the last time we have been in such unity and purpose that God would come down and see the city and the tower that men were building? After careful analysis, God's assessment was this: these people have become one, but one in the wrong way. They are of one language, saying the same thing. They are articulating the same message. We will build. We will build. We will build. But the problem, they had the wrong spirit behind what they were building. Nothing they have imagined, nothing they had imagined will be restrained from them. And God knew this, because even evil, their perfect unity. Let us go down and confound their language. Excuse me? God said to the Trinity, He spoke in a Trinitarian board meeting. He spoke to angelic beings, probably called Michael, Gabriel, and some of them together, and said, let us go down. And what are we going to do? We got to end this right now. We got to confound their language, so they cannot understand each other. They were scattered throughout the earth, and they left off of building the city. They let the tower alone. God knew, in order to stop their efforts, they would have to keep them from verbally agreeing. Unlimited teaching right here on this precept. But listen, no wonder Jesus said, Tag, no matter what you go through. Truly I tell you that if two of you on earth shall agree on anything you speak, you ask for, it will be done for them by my Father which is in heaven. I want us to get back to the thought that most kingdom shifts most kingdom shifts, when it happens, the expansion doesn't come off the heels of prosperity. The expansion of a kingdom shift from one level to another that's going to happen to Tag, it comes off of resistance. I'm telling you, it don't come out of prosperity. Most people forget him in prosperity. The next level of the shift for Tag Church, when we get back in the kingdom of God, is going to be coming out of Corona. When people are starting to send in money, checks are showing up in the church that they don't even know the names on the check. The preachers are telling me people are scared. People, Coronas, and they better be scared, because if they die of it, they're going to go to hell. Their fear shouldn't be a bug. It should be the hell that awaits them after the bug kills them. Woo! Because they've been told and they walk from it. They've been preached to and they laughed at it. They've thrown up all type of mannerisms during the word. They've mocked the Pentecostal singing. And now a bug showed up from China. A stinking, crawly, eerie looking bug. You feel it yet? It's killing their grandmother. It's killing some of their kids. Who walk in stores and sit in churches, look like Star Wars. And it's weird as heck. You think I'm getting used to this? You lost your stinking mind. You crazy. This ain't normal. I ain't gonna call this the new normal. But I'm gonna tell everybody something. We're getting back. When we get back, some of you wrote your checks and texts to give and all that. Remember this. Some of you all of a sudden got a little thirst for church again. I remember 911 when it happened. The pastors were calling me. 911, buildings collapsing, New York City, terrorists attacking, which ain't this bad. Ain't this bad. Pastors, boy, we had more Wednesday night we did Sunday morning. I said, let's see how long it lasts. It lasted 6 weeks. I travel every week, so I observed, kept a diary about it. Notes. Lasted about 6 weeks. Not even as long as his bugs lasted. About 6 weeks, people going right back to unfaithfulness, right back to not giving, right back to not caring, right back to their mannerisms, snickering at stuff going on. You don't have to do all that. They're radical. They're too far out there. I hope to God in this resistance you don't forget. And I want you to always remember this. 70 went into Egypt. 2.5 million came out of it. 120 started in the upper room. The dispersion happened. They came out and subverted nations. I want to ask you one question while we're getting back. How, Tag, will you come out of this season? How to take friction and change it absolutely into momentum is the key message. You will not hear a message more important of about what we're seeing right now. You got to regain all momentum and do not let it go anywhere. You got to speak the same thing. The power of verbally speaking the same thing. The power of verbally being happy to be back. The power verbally to not worry about all this. The power verbally to says, no plague shall come nigh thy dwelling. And as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. My God, there's a Job's hedge. There's a hedge in 2000 and the year 20. And number 3, a few minutes, I'm done. We must regain our focus. I sat with a Tag. Here's where you got to fight it. Here's what you're going to fight to regain focus. Because of your finances, because of your by the way, your unemployment's going to run out. They're going to stop that eventually. So you must stay focused. I sat with a businessman. He shared with me the economic slump his corporation was going through. And I shared what I believe to be a prophetic word for his business. The Holy Spirit prompted me to remind him that the greatest floods often follow the greatest droughts. I want you to remember this Tag. The greatest floods in history often follow the greatest droughts. A climatologist that studies climates revealed that it is common for massive floods to follow seasons of extreme drought. 5 years ago in Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, we moved there, and 9 years ago from El Dorado. 5 years and something ago, I'm always been a water skier, the lakes of Arkansas, the rivers, the lakes, water skiing, of course, jet skiing, all of it. Family was on the water. So water is very important to me for fun with our family. It's our number one thing we do. But we face one of the greatest droughts on record. Our lake levels dropped 13 feet, not inches, feet. The interesting thing about the drought was once the normal water level receded, once the shoreline began to shrink, it revealed new territory that before had been hidden. Covered up or undetectable where things in the environment were at a normal level. Listen, it was the drought, the stripping away, that revealed hidden treasures. They found, when it went down that much in Texas, lost rare coins. They found jewelry that was not average jewelry. They found sunken cars that people were looking for. They found boats and even legit fossilized dinosaur prints. They never could see it when the water level was normal. It was when the drought hit and it got down that all the head dinosaur studiers came in, and it was definitely from all over the world, legit. Some of the greatest treasures were unearthed in a season of lack. I watched as wealth was discovered in drought. I watched as wealth was discovered in drought. The truth is, you will discover, tag, in lack what you may never discern in prosperity. Robby, as believers, should we embrace this season of lack? Only if it is set up for a season of supernatural overflow. I want you to remember this. The children of Israel carried off the wealth of Egypt during their nation's greatest cycle of poverty. The children of Israel carried away Egypt, the one that captivated them, captured them, enslaved them, carried away their wealth. 400 years of drought, and they carried away the wealth of their captors in 24 hours. It was desperation and lack that forced them to rise up and claim their inheritance. Please listen. In Texas, our water table was 12 to 13 feet below normal. Our shorelines combined together had receded by a half a mile deep. Marinas were abandoned. They looked like deer stands sitting out on the land. Marinas were abandoned. Boat ramps were closed. Drinking water was ruled borderline toxic. New islands formed. We could walk across new territory. Tracy and I said, Tracy, this is getting serious. I took my wife by the hand. We walked the shorelines of the lakes that we went to, and we prayed for rain. In our finite thinking, we would try to estimate how long, based on average rain projections, it would take to get our lake levels back to normal. We would pray, God, grant us enough rain just to get back to normal. In crisis, have you ever done something similar, such as what you're feeling now? You pray, just get us finances back to even, God. Even living paycheck to paycheck would look good now, because we ain't even been able. We used to complain about paycheck to paycheck. God, now paycheck to paycheck would look absolutely amazing. You're all hearing me? Or you pray, let me just wake up without pain today. Or Lord, you don't have to make my marriage miraculous, just make it bearable. I ask for it to just be bearable. I got to admit it. In our drought, we thought our faith was strong when we prayed for recovery, back to normal, because our prayers were based on the expectation of what non-spiritual people were forecasting for our future in Texas. We lived off the expected projections of people who did not understand how seasons operate within the kingdom of God. They projected, listen, God-given favored conditions. It would take no less than 3 years to recover. What everybody's saying about the corona, even in 10 weeks, if it stopped now, it's going to take more than years to get everything back. Like Robby and Tracy and everybody thought about the water levels of Texas. Therefore, you know what happened to Tracy and I? We almost missed out on what God wanted to do. And that was to turn our season of drought into a season of excess. Are you ready? They said 3 years. I know there were other people praying, churches everywhere. Gateway, Robert Morris's church, right 3 miles from me. They all got together and prayed. Tracy and I walked on the shorelines. All the specialists, the brilliant minds were saying 3 years. In 32 days, we went from being 13 feet beneath the water table elevations to 23 feet above. We went from 13 feet beneath to 23 feet above. You ready? 32 days, 13 feet under to 23 feet over, and no one projected it. Therefore, no one was prepared for the increase. Everything that should have been preserved in our season of overflow was lost because no one had the faith or foresight to believe for excess while we were in a season of drought. What you prepare, the seed you release in your season of drought, it's a clear picture of what you believe to be true about your future. Please listen to what I'm saying. It's a reason, even in a drought, Tracy and I take our seed. We're not being weird. You know me. We're not weird. We speak to that seed. In a time of desperation, I form a prayer agreement with her. 10 weeks, almost 3 months with no evangelism. I form a prayer agreement with her. She got out of bed the other day. I said, give me a hand. We both in underwear. I said, well, don't put your clothes on. It's time to walk. Not outside at the lake shore. Don't panic, Pastor. Amen. I didn't go to the lake. She looked at me. We go in the lake again? I said, no. Amen. We're naked right now. Just let's walk in our house. I had my underwear on. She had hers. I said, give me a hand. We walked all over that house. I said, I declare right now in the name of the Lord, I declare that finances are coming in. I declare this thing's going to end. I declare this demon-possessed bug's going to shut down. I declare those that are guilty of causing it's going to be exposed, and the world is going to join America in punishing, and God's going to have His say about it. Hear me? We spoke to the seed. We released it with expectation, and it's going to rewrite our future. If you are spiritually in tune with what God is doing, your blessing can become you better hear me. If you're not spiritually in tune with what God is doing, your blessing can become a curse simply because you don't discern how to sow into what is next. It's the reason our seed must go before us in the future. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah stood with his servant, King Ahab. Elijah turns and says to the king, in the natural, all you see is drought. But in the supernatural, all I hear is an abundance of rain. With a prophetic warning, Elijah warned Ahab, get in your chariot, go down to the mountain, lest the blessings that are coming overtake you and destroy you. There are narrow windows of time. Listen, where we be given divine commissions to repossession ourselves. This is your chance. Let's get back, no matter what anything looks like, and let's go where you've never been. What have we been waiting on? What did it take to get us to that level? Not get it back. Let's get back to a position so that which was designed to be a blessing does not turn into a curse. God is giving our nation and churches space and opportunity. God is giving our nation and our churches space and opportunity to reposition ourselves in a season of drought. And what you do with the prophetic instruction released in this season will determine if the abundance of what is on the horizon for Tag Church will destroy you or it will multiply you. Elijah looked at his servant, instructed him, go to the edge of this mountain, look for the overflow that is coming. Come back and reveal to me what you see. The young protege Elisha comes back. I'm sorry, sir, I do not see Mr. Mentor, I do not see a manifestation of what you are hearing. Son, go look again, for it is coming. The second time he came back, I don't see anything. Third time, blank sky. Fourth time, a few birds. Fifth time, sixth time, nothing. Seventh time, thank God for patient prophets and mentors. Seventh time, I think I'm starting to see something, the protege said, something on the horizon that looks like it could be in connection to what Robby Mitchell you're preaching right now. Heaven is about to send us something. Heaven is about to come down. I wish y'all was seeing this. Heaven is about to come down to Tag Church as we are coming out of this. An oasis, a healing center. When we have revelation concerning our harvest, we'll prophesy over it until everyone in our environment can see it. We'll speak and sow into the word that is being prophetically released over our future. Faith comes by hearing. That's the natural order of it. To hear and then to see, to witness what's been spoken. God has been painting a picture of Tag's potential harvest for a long time. He's given you prophetic dreams. Some of you tell me visions when I come in revival. God's given you. He's sent you people your way. He's deposited words of encouragement. He's awakened you in the middle of the night. He's spoken to you about a seed that would activate your harvest. What you do with the instruction spoken over your life and to you, how you handle it, when and if you release it, determines the timing of your harvest. I want to say this in the closing remarks to Tag. Stop wrestling with God, Jacob. And Judas, stop negotiating with your enemy. Pick up the resources buried within your drought. Walk into your future. When you are focused, you'll see the cloud in the shape of a man's hand while it is still in the distance, but it is coming in momentum your way. And like the prophet's servant, your eyes will see that there are more that are for you than are against you. I close with this thought on recapturing, number 3, our focus. One of the atrocities of World War II, or any war that Hitler was a master of, was dehumanizing an individual's identity. The goal in the opposition is to uproot and strip away their enemy's connection to their identity. Recently, I was in Israel. Pastor, we toured the Holocaust Museum, such as you did. Something stuck out to me that many of our people going when we followed, they passed it. They were looking at the pictures and crying, but they didn't catch this. In World War II, all the incoming prisoners who were assigned to concentration camps were given a certain serial number. It was sewn into their prison uniforms, the Jews. Only those prisoners selected for work were issued serial numbers. Those prisoners sent directly to the gas chambers were not registered, and they received no serial number on their clothing nor tattooed into their body. Those who were to be executed within their camps received serial numbers. Across their chest was with indelible ink. They were tattooed so their bodies could be counted and registered. Their identity was reduced to a number. Although we aren't in a physical war right now, we're in a spiritual war. You ready? And during this season, the enemy of your soul wants to reduce your identity down to a number and convince you that you are nothing more than a statistic in a world filled with chaos. My opinion, it could be with the chipping and everything else that's headed toward. If we're not careful, we will lose sight of who we're called to be. Tag, you're not a number. You're not a number to God. He calls you by your name, and He knows everything about you. Do not let a season of hardship reshape your identity. Elijah prophesied that a drought was coming. Watch this. And by virtue of the word he gave, he became a participant of that fulfillment. The drought he prophesied was coming. He didn't live in a bubble. He knew he would be in that drought, that he just got through prophesying. That isn't negative. You know what happened? For 3 years, Elijah depended on a raven and a river. He depended on a raven and a river. While in solitude, he could have questioned his calling as a prophet. Instead, he rejoiced that God kept him alive. The national crisis did not diminish his calling. It amplified it. He prophesied it. It came to pass. He stayed strong. There's a season coming when I believe this church is going to receive great increase from those who maybe despise you, jealous of you. As you break free from the chains that have maybe kept some of you back personally at home, your focus has been derailed. He sold you a lie that you're not good enough. God will not restore your wealth, your health, your vision. And I say it again. When Israel left for the promised land, they walked out in battle formation with the wealth of Egypt on their backs. God will perform His word. He can do it in a day. He can do it in a day. You got to believe it. But I tell you what you got to do. I ain't messing around with all this stuff. Yeah, and I think some are over-exaggerated in some areas. Yeah, and I think we got to be safe. And I think I'm in a balancing act right now, balancing it all. But I'm also going to tell you this. I'm getting back. This ain't no, I'm getting back. I'm getting back. I'm going to keep the rules, but I'm getting back. You be sensitive. There's a lot of sick, crushed, broke people out here, distressed, wore out. Coronavirus in 10 weeks has almost split their homes. They're almost divorced. I'm dealing with them. 10 weeks. You didn't have nothing in the first place. If coronavirus can break your marriage up in 10 weeks, you need to go over your vows again. We need to have you get married again. I don't even know if you're married. It's ridiculous. But it happens, so we got to deal with it. I got to be merciful. I got to pick up the stone of mercy. Not throw it at them. You with me? This ain't the last time. Oh, God. This ain't the last time anything like this is going to happen. Even before the rapture of the church, I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to prophesy it. Things like this are going to stem off of things. Going to stem off. This thing's got viruses. It's got cousins. It's got some uncles and some aunts and some cousins. Things are going to stem off of things going to happen. That ain't negative. I'm prophesying a drought, Elijah. And I'm going to be in it. I'm not going to Mars or Pluto when it happens. I'm going to stay on the earth. But I'm telling you now, there's some birth pains are beginning before the rapture. And it's going to get worse. They're going to get heavy. We got to get back. We got to walk in the Spirit. And I'm going to say this again. God bless you. You got to remain being faithful to this church because this is your family and you're going to need one another. You need one another. Y'all with me?
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, you can do so by clicking right here. And also, here's another message that might be of a great blessing to you. You can click right here. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. God bless you.